Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today. We are getting started here with our webinar, and we've got people joining us here, so we're going to give it just a minute before we get started. See the number climbing a little bit here, so wait about 1 minute, and then we'll get going with our questions and answers for today. For those of you who are just joining us, I was just talking with the panelists about the topics for today, and we're going to start with questions on the CARES Act that was just passed and any SBA-based questions that you have, and then we'll go into the other topics. So if you have questions about the SBA loan process or any of those types of questions, put those into the Q&A box below there before we get started here, and we'll get them in the queue. All right, so the looks like the number is still climbing, but it's climbing slower, so we'll go ahead and get started. So this is our third open forum Q&A webinar that ARVC is hosting. We're doing these every Monday and Thursday. It's a chance for you to get all your questions answered by our panel of industry experts. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As participants continue to hop online here, I want to start by reminding everyone that we're updating our information hub at arvc.org/coronavirus multiple times a day with new resources and up-to-the-minute updates as we have them. So you can also download and listen to our previous webinars and see state-specific updates. We likely aren't going to get to every question today, but we are posting answers to those questions that we don't cover specifically on each webinar. So if your question today doesn't get answered, you'll be able to find expert answers there as well. I also want to remind everyone of a couple of great tools on that page. One is the reputation management tool. It's free and easy way to keep a pulse on comments about your business on social channels. This tool is brought to you by Insider Perks and ARVC. And you can also create a customized emergency plan and access a host of templates using the Disaster Hawk app brought to you by Appp. There's a link to both of these tools you can download on arvc.org/coronavirus. Before I introduce everyone on today's panel, I'm going to kick it over to Jacqueline Gloria on the ARVC team for some quick instructions on how you'll be submitting your questions today. Jack?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As we go through today's call, if you have a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom center of your Zoom window. If you see a question that somebody else has asked and it's a topic that you two are interested in, you can hit the like or the thumbs up icon to help float that question to the top of the list. The chat and the raised hands features have been disabled. David?
Thanks, Jack. So with those instructions out of the way, I'd like to do some quick introductions of our panelists today. We have panelists who are experts in emergency planning, marketing, business and finance, insurance, and advocacy with us today. Jeff Sims is our expert answering questions on your advocacy questions. Jeff is ARVC's Senior Director of State Relations and Program Advocacy and has been working with legislators and lobbyists in Washington and at the state level on the industry's behalf for more than a decade. Our business and finance expert ready to answer your SBA loan questions and the like today is Paul Bosley, founder of Business Finance Depot. Paul established this company in 2006 and is regularly volunteers as a counselor at the SBA, helping entrepreneurs with their financial needs. Our emergency planning expert today, again, is Patrick Hardy. Patrick is CEO of Appp, the leading disaster management company in our industry, and is a certified emergency manager and a certified risk manager. We have two insurance experts with us today, again, Chris Hipple from Leavitt and Irene Jones from Marshall & Sterling, both 25-year veterans of the insurance industry. Chris's agency, Leavitt, focuses on the needs of the RV park and campground industry nationwide, and he has been a featured speaker and educator at numerous ARVC events. And Irene leads Marshall & Sterling's campground insurance program, and she's known for her Marshall & Sterling Press Play video series. Covering marketing, we have Brian Searl and Mark Koep joining us again today. Brian is the CEO of Insider Perks, a full-service digital agency. providing best-in-class marketing and advertising services for our industry. And Mark is a virtual entrepreneur traveling the country with his family in their RV, and he's the founder and CEO of CampgroundViews.com. Our legal expert, Christine Taylor, who has been joining us, was pulled away this morning and will be unable to join us this morning, but we will work with her to get the answers to any of our legal questions that pop up today and get them posted on arvic.org/coronavirus. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. We have a number of questions, like I mentioned, in already for all of our experts, but we've had a lot come in since Friday's passage of the CARES Act that are in relation to the SBA loan process and the like. So we're going to start today with Paul Bosley and get a bunch of those questions answered before Paul has to jump off. So Paul, we're going to start with the first question that we have is there any difference in a recommended approach or timing for seasonal campgrounds? I have a year-round and seasonal payroll to cover and have 2 active SBA loans. We do not open to campers until May, but reservation cancellations are coming in, and of course, operating expenses are also year-round. So the question is, what's the recommended approach for timing of this loan process for those campgrounds that may be seasonal?
Well, there's 2 parts of this answer. The first part is if you've been in business in 2019, you have 2 choices for calculating your average monthly payroll. Choice 1 is you calculate your average monthly payroll based on your payroll starting February 15th, 2019 and ending June 30th, 2019. If you have seasonal workers, you can opt to calculate your average monthly payroll by starting at March 1st, and that's it. Those are the 2 choices you have if you are open for business in 2019. If you are not open for business in 2019, you have to calculate your payroll based on the period starting January 1st and ending February 29th to get your average monthly payroll. The second part of my answer, which has to do with his 2 existing SBA loans, is anyone that has, any business, I should say, that has an SBA loan that's outstanding, there will be no payments required. They'll be paid by the federal government to your SBA lender starting April 1st and ending October 1st. So that those loan payments have been forgiven.
Okay. The next question that we have is, can a cleaning service, or actually I would say any vendor that is paid biweekly or monthly and receive a 1099 be included in the formula for paycheck protection loans?
No. What they should do, the vendor should apply for their money.
Okay. So it's separate for them. Anybody who's getting a 1099 would not be included in this process for our campground owners.
No, but the vendors need money just like the campgrounds need money. So the vendors would apply for their own using the same formula.
Okay.
Because that's their money.
Okay.
That's their money that they get paid.
Yep. All right. The third question we have here is, are there specific guidelines as to what you can use the money for? Could you use it, for instance, to pay off the existing campground mortgage at a lower rate, or gravel for roads, or electric meters for long-term sites, etc.?
Allowable uses are as follows: payroll costs, costs related to the continuation of group health care benefits, employee salaries, commissions, payments of interest on any mortgage obligation, rent, utilities, and interest on other debt obligations.
Okay. Pretty easy list. Question 4, do owners' wages count for this? Or if let's see, hold on a second. Do owners' wages count for this if they are not paid or on regular payroll?
So that's a good question. See, in our company, I'm the owner and I'm paid on payroll. So we're going to apply ourselves, our company, for me. I guess what would happen, it sounds like to me, that owner would apply as a 1099 employee. I guess they probably get a 1099 for whatever they take out in owner's compensation. And if it's booked as dividends, they wouldn't be able to count it. It depends on how they book it, because my accountant pays me in part, or I should say, my accountant advises our company to pay me in part by salary and in part by dividends, because dividends you don't pay Social Security on. So if they do the same thing, whatever they take in dividends would not be counted because that's not salary. But if they get a 1099 for owner distributions, then they could apply themselves for that, so long as they're not earning more than 100 grand a year. If they're earning over 100 grand a year, then they're not able to do it because that's the cap. Anybody over $100,000 a year is not allowed to be included in any of these calculations.
Okay, so it comes down to how they're getting paid, basically. So I'll follow up with that question asker and find out what more information, and then maybe we can get a more detailed answer to them as well. Okay, the next question is, if applying for an SBA economic injury disaster loan, what is the best way to determine the amount of the loan, since we don't really know how long the emergency will last?
That's a good question. 25,000 or less is unsecured. So when I did it as a lark, just to see what it was like to go through it, I think I mentioned that 2 weeks ago on 60 Minutes, I did it because I figured the world was watching 60 Minutes. And I applied for 25 grand because it's unsecured. Anything over 25 grand has got to be fully secured. So the first consideration that anybody should have is if they're willing to put up or not willing to put up collateral for the loan. And then based on, I guess, the way I would have done it is when we're packaging SBA loans, for instance, for a startup, we usually tell people to include 3 months of working capital or 6 months of working capital, depending on how conservative or how aggressive they are. So I would say if I was advising a client, based on what I'm seeing now, I'd probably put in at least 3 months of working capital if I'm comfortable putting up collateral.
Okay. We're getting a lot of questions about where to go to get these loans. You know, do they apply through the SBA or through their bank? What recommendations do you have on that?
Which loan?
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me see if it's specific here in the question. Do we apply for the SBA loan through our bank or directly through the SBA website was one question. And then the other one was very similar. I keep hearing the CARE loans will be available through SBA lenders as well as FDIC insured lenders. Is this true? Will I be able to apply through a lender that is not an SBA lender?
All right. Again, that's a two-part question. In regards to the economic injury disaster loan, E Idl, the SBA loan that's been out there for years for hurricanes and whatever, that they're using the same program for the coronavirus. That's done directly through the SBA on the SBA's website. There's no intermediary. In regards to the CARE Act, as far as I'll just mention the loan forgiveness part that I mentioned earlier, that's going to be done directly between the lender and the borrower. So they don't have to do anything. In fact, I talked to one of my lenders that I've done a lot of work with, and they're going to contact all their loans and just tell them they don't have to worry about making payments from April until October. In regards to the CARE Act, they passed what's called the Paycheck Protection Program Loan. That's PPP loan. That is going to be administered by any bank in the country that wants to make it, wants to do it. No, the SBA is not telling them they have to do it, but whether they're an SBA lender or not, they can choose to do it. A lot of these loans are going to be small loans. I mean, so for instance, in my case, as an example, the loan's only going to be something like 18 grand or something like that. So the question is the bank going to be willing to do that? You know, is the bank going to be willing to do those kind of loans? Because they're going to have to process the paperwork, and then they're going to get paid a fee directly by the SBA to do it. So there's no fees involved with the PPP loan program. There's no fees, there's no guarantee fee, there's nothing. They just apply, and in the best case, it gets forgiven. So everyone's going to have to decide for themselves, A, if they want to apply, and my attitude is if you don't apply, you're crazy. I mean, why would you be? And then B, where do you apply? Do you go to your local bank? I mean, are you going to do it online? Is your bank going to contact you? Those are all questions that you're going to have to, each person's going to have to answer for themselves. Our company, we're setting up a whole program, a consulting program we're going to offer where they can do it with us through a secure loan portal. But, you know, we're going to provide all the information that they can download for free and just take to their local lender if they choose to do it. All SBA lenders will probably participate, but even credit unions and local banks will be allowed to participate if they choose to do it. They just have to be set up for the volume.
Are those campgrounds that go for the PPP loan, are they responsible for the interest on that forgiven loan amount? Do you know?
Well, whatever is, here's the process. If it's done exactly the way that the SBA anticipates it being done, which is obviously debatable, but if it's done properly, with the way, I'll just answer the question again, like my own company. I know what I got to provide. You got to provide copies of payroll that you pay people from the middle of February until the end of May. You have to provide your utility bill. You have to provide either the interest on your mortgage or your rent payment. And you submit that to the same SBA lender that gave you the PPP loan. Whatever portion is forgiven is, whatever, excuse me, I said that wrong. Whatever portion is not forgiven is converted to a 7A, 10-year term, 4% interest, no prepayment penalty. That's the way I understand it. So the principal balance will be whatever is not forgiven.
Okay. In terms of the forgiven portion, though, is the entire thing forgiven, including the interest?
Yeah, I mean, my goal is to, I'm basically going to get 18.5 of free money. That's the goal.
Yep. Okay. I'm sticking with the PPP loan question. We've got a question here that says in their research of it that a loan can only be forgiven if you keep your employees working. Do you know if that's the case?
Here's the way it's done. Whatever employees that you laid off, obviously you're not going to count to the money that's forgiven, but the loan itself is based upon the formula that I explained earlier in this webinar. So let's just assume, I'm just going to make an example. Let's just say the loan amount is 100 grand. And let's just say at the end of the period, they turn in receipts between the people that they're paying now, the ones that they paid for that period of time, and their interest on their mortgage, assuming they own the property, and their utility bill, that comes out to 50 grand. They laid people off. So they get 50 grand forgiven. They got a $50,000 loan for 10 years at 4% with no prepayment penalty.
Okay. So for those of you who are just joining us, we've had a number of people join in the last 10 minutes. We are talking specifically with Paul Bosley about questions coming in about the SBA process and the CARES Act that was passed on Friday. So if you have questions relating to that, we're doing those first, and you can ask them using the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. Sticking with the employee questions, Paul, the question, I want to make sure that I think you answered this one, but I want to make sure that we did. If a campground has already laid off employees, but you then bring them back once you receive the loan, will you qualify for loan forgiveness at that point?
Yeah. What you're doing is you're turning in your payroll records for the period of time that this covers, which is I think it's from May 15th until, I'd have to check, I think it's probably the end of May. And then let's just say they were laid off and you start them, I don't know, April 15th. So what's going to happen is that portion of the payroll that you paid them is going to be forgiven, because that's what you're going to turn in with your receipt. So if you laid people off and the period starts February 15th, and now you're getting the loan, let's just say April 15th, then you didn't have anybody on payroll that you laid off from February 15th until April 15th. So you're obviously not going to get that amount forgiven. If you bring,
and if they don't have,
that portion will be forgiven.
Okay. And if they don't have employees, let's say they've been closed, and so they don't have employees working, what financial assistance is available? What would you recommend for those campgrounds?
Well, I mean, let's just look at it from the logical perspective. Let's just say you look at the opportunity. This loan has no collateral, no personal guarantee. So let's just say last year, following the formula, that campground employed people so that they would be able to qualify for a loan, let's just say of $50,000. And let's just say they're going to have utilities over this period anyhow, and they're going to have interest on their mortgage anyhow, and maybe they have no payroll at all. So let's just say, for conversation's sake, over the period, they run up a bill of 10 grand between interest and utilities with no payroll. So at the end of the period, they turn that in, 10,000 is forgiven, and now they got a 40,000 loan for 10 years at 4% with no prepayment penalty. I would do that anyhow. Why wouldn't you do it? You're not even personally guaranteeing it. You have no collateral, unless you don't need money.
Which for most of us, most people on this call probably isn't the case. So, all right. So we have another question coming in. Can I apply for both a PPP and an E Idl loan at the same time?
You can, but you can't accept them both.
Okay. Would you recommend that they apply for both and see what happens, and then go with the best?
Nobody's going to get declined for the PPP loan. Yep. So again, going back to my collateral question, let's just say in my case, I'll use my case again because it's quite crystal clear. I applied for a $25,000 E Idl loan, which is 3.5%, no personal guarantee, no collateral, and it's at 3.5% over 10 years. I'm applying for an $18,000 PPPL loan that's going to get written off. Which one do you think I should do? Which would you do? Would you put up your house?
I'm not sure.
And
I would.
Well, think about it. I'm trying to make people think about their options. If you got to put up collateral for an E Idl loan over $25,000, but you don't have to put it up under $25,000, but you're personally guaranteeing a loan and it's not going to get written off. And the alternate to that is I'm going to get $18,000 that's going to get written off, totally free, never have to repay it.
Well, you're going to go with that option.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. You got to do is you have to understand these two options. And that's why you've done such a great job, David, to put these webinars together and pull your panel together. And then you have to decide for yourself what's your best option.
Hey, Paul, can you explain where you're getting your $18,000 number from again?
Yes. My accountant and my bookkeeper and I had decided that last year when I was in business, I was going to be on a salary of $83,000 a year. And then the rest was going to be dividends. So it's my company. It's just me. So I'm getting paid through a payroll. My average monthly payroll expense, which is just me, is roughly, I'm using rough numbers, $7,000 a month. The formula that David will give out to everybody, which is a PDF, a fillable PDF that I circulated, is you take your average payroll and you multiply it by 2.5. That's the factor that Congress agreed on. So $7,000 times 2.5 is roughly 18 grand. So whatever your payroll is the number times 2.5. So I had a guy that hired us for our package. It's one of the franchisors I deal with last night. His loan is going to be roughly $225,000 because when you take his average payroll times 2.5, it's going to be it's roughly $250,000. And he hasn't laid off any employees because they wanted to hang on to him because it's a restaurant and they do delivery. So he's going to get it all forgiven. So it's like a free gift for $225,000. So everybody's in their own situation. You look at the formula, you figure out what your average payroll was. You got like the example earlier, the second question about the vendor. So the vendor is getting paid by the campground maybe $1,000 a month, and he's got a business that he makes whatever, $3,000 a month. So you take 3,000 times 2.5, he's got a $7,500 application that he goes running off to his local bank with.
Okay. And we'll, that form, just so everyone is aware, that form that Paul was just mentioning, we'll have that up on arvic.org/coronavirus so you can download it and use it.
Can we add to this question now a little bit? So they've extended the tax deadline to July. And so there's also a debate, and Paul, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's also a debate on whether or not you file your taxes for 2019 now or wait until after you apply for a loan. What is your feedback on that? If they paid more in payroll in 2018, should they hold off on filing taxes until after they go through this process, or what's your feedback there?
Good question.
Well, my understanding, the only thing that could affect your tax filing for last year now would be you have 2 more weeks to put money into an IRA. That's it. Other than that, the books on 2019 are closed.
Okay. Got another question in here that has to do with the IRS, so let's ask that one next. Can you, you know anything more about the program where the IRS offsets your 941 deposits with sick pay that they offer employees due to COVID-19?
No.
Okay.
That's
might be a
yeah,
more of an accountant question.
That's more of an accounting question. You know, yes, I'll just as an aside, yesterday in the morning, my CPA contacted me and I was emailing him a lot of documents about this. And right now the CPAs have all got to absorb the rule changes because there's significant changes that are going to impact the filing for this year. And they're new to this just like I am and you are and everybody else is. So they're trying to figure it out. So my advice would be give your CPA a little bit of time and then contact them or her.
Okay. The next question is in regards to the loans and a campground owner's credit score. Do they need to have a credit score of a particular number or higher to qualify for any of these loans?
For the E Idl, the disaster loan, yes. For the PPP loan, it's not underwritten. In fact, I was talking to one of my lenders, is old school. I was talking to him on Friday, and he says, I don't even have, this is an old guy in his 70s. We're personal friends. He's a friend, but he's kind of / a mentor to me. I really admire the guy a lot. And he said, you know, I don't even have to pull credit, but I'm thinking I might pull it because if the person's a stiff, I'm not going to give it to him. But that's just him, old school, crotchety lender. But no, there's no, it's supposed to be just an automatic, get the money out there so people can pay their bills.
Okay. This next one actually has to do with insurance as well. So maybe I'm going to pose it to you first, Paul, and then if the insurance experts want to chime in. Do you know if insurance premiums are considered utilities for payment through these SBA loans?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so? Okay.
No.
Have either of the insurance experts heard anything about that?
He just said
I
health
had heard that
insurance,
they
I think.
Say again?
Well, Paul referenced health insurance, but I think the question is about business insurance, and I haven't heard anything about that. Chris, have you?
I had heard from our corporate that it was considered something that you would be paid out of, and all these SBA loans need to be secured because they are requiring insurance. So I had a guy call me saying he was getting an SBA loan and needed insurance in order to qualify. So
That's a different loan, what he's talking about. All SBA 7A loans require insurance. But this particular PPL loan is more of a paycheck protection program loan. So you're right about all loans except for the PPP loan.
Okay, and then for right now anyway, it looks like we are at our last SBA question. Can you, and it's basically reminding everyone what the terms of what will be forgiven on the forgivable loans, basically.
All right, let me open that up. Hold on just a second. Just bear with me. I've got one of these Q&A things here. I'll tell you what, can you go to the next question, then we'll circle
Sure.
back to
We'll
that?
come back. Yeah, we'll come back to it. Let me let's see what the topic on this one is. Okay, refund season proper procedures. We have 400 seasonal campers eager to come back. What should we do in this particular instance? If this goes on, do we have to refund seasonals and need the proper procedures for that type of refund? I'm going to open that up to the entire panel, see if anybody has a thought on that question.
Well, I guess Mark, I'll jump in for marketing on this one. Your seasonals, there's seasonals for all parks that have seasonal guests. They know that they're the bread and butter that pay the bills, and so you want to keep the seasonals as happy as possible. They also are likely going to be the most impacted by economic shutdowns. You know, usually a little bit tighter incomes. So they're going to be hurting financially. So the first thing they're going to try to cut is their seasonal payment. I know a lot of folks have their seasonal payments due on April 1st. So I would not be surprised if you don't get checks on April 1st from a lot of your folks that are seasonal guests. You probably don't have a line in your contract that says when a pandemic breaks out, here is what is going to happen. And so it's going to be a hard situation. So you're going to have some honest conversations with them, let them know where they're at, and then really be creative. Hopefully you can keep them on board, do some sort of credits of future stays, something like that to keep them paying and keep some money coming in the door.
Paul, are you ready to, with the,
Yeah.
go back to that other question?
Yeah, the question, I'm just reading off a question from the SBA. How do I get forgiveness on my PPP loan? You must apply through your lender for forgiveness on your loan. In this application, you must include the following: documentation verifying the number of employees on payroll and pay. And the reason for pay rates is, again, people over 100 grand are not eligible, including IRS payroll tax filings and state income, payroll, and unemployment insurance filings. That's number one. Number two, documents verifying payments on covered mortgage obligations, lease obligations, and utilities. That's why I don't think insurance is part of it. But I think earlier someone else was saying something about health insurance, which is part of payroll. And then third, certification from a representative of your business or organization that is authorized to certify that the documentation is provided is true and that the amount that is being forgiven was used in accordance with the program's guidelines for use. Otherwise, you'll be hung up upside down by your toes. That's it.
All right. We'll move on to another topic here. For those of you who are just joining us, though, we spent the first 35 minutes of the webinar talking specifically about SBA loan questions. So if you have those questions, put them in the Q&A box, and we'll get back to them in the next portion of the webinar. I'm going to jump now, though, to Patrick Hardy, because we've got a couple of questions here about emergency plan. And they're asking specifically for protocols and plans for various scenarios. Guests who come to stay with us and need to self-quarantine, guests who develop symptoms while they're staying with us, those types of things. And I'm guessing that those protocols and plans can be done on the Disaster Hawk app. Is that correct? And if so, can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, hi, David. I think that, well, the answer is that those are things that we are developing. And in fact, in the app, we do talk about how are you going to handle it if you have somebody who comes to the park who already is experiencing symptoms. You have to, one of the things that we emphasize is obviously that you develop a policy. We create suggested policies for folks, but one of the things that we do write in the app, and I think this becomes really important as well, and I suppose this isn't as clear-cut an answer as I suppose many would like to hear, is that you know, one of the things that we talk about is we say, look, what is your policy going to be in this scenario or that scenario? But keeping that in mind, make sure that you're following all the local laws. So make sure that you're actually consulting with public health. One of the things we also say is that because things have become very narrowly construed, particularly county to county, you need to talk to and or if it's placed on the website. Some public health departments have done a really good job of doing this, of saying these are the confidentiality issues. This is what you're allowed to do. This is what you're not allowed to do if an employee becomes ill or if a camper becomes ill, and what you have to do if someone becomes ill who is not an employee but somebody who is just you know, a guest who is already there. The other question regarding self-quarantining, yes, you absolutely have to have a policy in place for how to quarantine folks, is because I think what is an issue, and some of you guys emailed me on the weekend, and I think this is a good point, which is some people said, well, you know, one of the things I do is that sometimes I go to the rigs and I talk with people and I do this and that, and I'm so used to doing that. I used to talk to this sort of handful of people who are here year round, and the answer is that you're probably going to need to curtail a lot of those policies. And I know when I emailed a few of you back, they said, I can't believe I would have to do that, and I just said, you know, you're going to have to, because you can't put people in a situation where they could potentially be exposed, especially if someone is self-quarantining. I know that social distancing now has become a lot more important. One of the things that came out of Italy last week, which I was on the Homeland Security call a couple days ago, and they were saying that they've been able to curtail the number of new cases because of really appropriate lockdowning. So yes, in the app we do talk about this, and I do sort of discuss with parks generally that, you know, your lockdown policies have to say, you know, you need to communicate it when people come in, because again, and I know I sound like a broken record here, but it is consistency that whenever a new guest comes in, you're telling them the same thing that you're telling everyone else who comes in either before or after them. So make sure that everything is uniform and that you have sort of a uniform application of it, because otherwise, as I said, what happens, and we're sort of hearing this anecdotally, is that people are hearing two different policies, they're hearing two different things, and some people are saying, well, I don't understand why you did this for one person, but you're not doing it for us. So I think it becomes important to lay out the policy, and one of the reasons why we have the app that we do is just because we just think that a single policy that you are applying to everybody ensures that you don't have miscommunications later. So, but otherwise, you know, you have to make sure that as long as you're following the laws and you've at least reviewed what the public health directives are. Thankfully, as I said, most county public health departments are being really good. They're doing an astonishingly good job of providing direction on what and how you're supposed to handle these things and which rules on confidentiality and other things can be waived in regards to the pandemic.
Patrick, I'm going to stick with you for just a second. We've had a couple of questions come in about RVers coming in from other states, and I know we've covered this on previous webinars, but it's getting a lot of likes, so I want to go ahead and ask it again. If you are, this campground specifically that's asking this is in an area that evidently doesn't have a whole lot of cases currently, and they're having RVers coming in from places that do, what are your recommendations on accepting or not accepting, and if accepting, what steps should they take to make sure that they're following all the CDC guidelines?
Every park should pretend that it already has a case. That's what I tell everybody. You should pretend that you already have a case or you're going to have one, because it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter whether you have been struck or not. It is going to happen. In fact, I don't know if those of you who know this, if you guys were hearing this, the news came out of the CDC on Saturday, which was cases are now migrating from the coast down into middle America. So there are literally counties where we wrote in our initial analysis that we thought it was very unlikely that it would strike there. And now because of the interpersonal transmission and because of evacuations, I know that sounds like a strange thing to say, but a lot of people who have vulnerable populations have literally evacuated out of a certain county. In fact, in the app, we actually write that too. We actually say, listen, if it gets that bad and you really can't stay here, just go leave and go and evacuate somewhere else. But the necessary consequence of that is that you are potentially bringing in vulnerable people into areas where perhaps COVID-19 either wasn't prevalent before or it didn't exist at all. And so the way that parks have to handle it is you have to assume that you're going to have a case, or you have to assume that you have one already, because by doing that, then you're already prepared. Because if you're not planning now, if you don't write a full plan now, then it's going to be very difficult to implement later. Because the answer to my previous question is very interesting, because, you know, I sort of shorted up by saying, well, you know, make sure that you're telling everybody who's coming in, you're giving them a consistent policy all the way through. But then the natural question becomes, well, what happens about people who came in before that time? And that's why we emphasize start putting your plans and implementing them now, so that when these things start to occur, everybody who's coming in now, you're just saying, okay, you know, we expect you to do this. That's the way this policy is going to be, and that's the way we're going to implement sheltering. This is what we expect you to do. We don't, you know, we're not going to go into common areas. We expect you to social distance. You know, as a customer process, you know, we're not going to be going to your rigs. We're not going to be doing this and that. So those are the kinds of things that it's important to plan for now. So every single park who's on this call right now, if you do not have a disaster plan, and if you have justified it to yourself and said, well, the reason why I don't have it is because I don't think it's going to happen to me, that is something that is not very smart, because every single park should have a plan, because it's inevitably going to occur. It's just like sometimes, you know, like in Florida, you know, when I do a lot of work down there, every park has a hurricane plan, regardless of whether there's going to be a hurricane that year or not. And in fact, 2010, 2012, they didn't have a single hurricane. So, but they still had plans. They still updated them. And I'm telling you this because when you guys are developing plans of your park, you have to come through and talk about the different details that we've outlined for these last couple of weeks, which is laying out the cleaning schedule, laying out the staffing schedule, laying out how you're going to handle a COVID positive response, how you're going to deal with the media if that occurs, how you're going to feel with what's going to happen if there's a false positive, or what happens if an employee becomes ill. So these are all elements of your disaster plan that you need to start implementing now, because otherwise, if it starts happening in your park, really it becomes almost too late at that point, because then it becomes very difficult to start to do things, because now you're being so reactive. And that's when parks start to do things knee-jerk, because they feel they're out of time, because something's happening. And what I've had parks say to me before is they say, okay, you know, we're now in this situation where things are, you know, where there's a lot of news coming out in the county, and so we're starting to get pressed on it. So what you have to do is so that at that point, what they'll do is they'll just create the first knee-jerk policy that they think is good. and they'll just say, well, I guess we're just going to do this and this. Where if you had thought about it maybe a couple weeks beforehand, what would happen is that they would have come up with a more consistent policy and one that's best specific for their parks.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're going to bounce back over to Paul for a minute. I have a payroll question here that some of this question has been answered already, but with new people hopping on, I want to ask it again. The question is two-part. One, we have no employees, but we do take an owner equity. Can this be considered as payroll? And then the second question is, what about the health insurance premiums and business insurance? Would these be covered?
The health insurance definitely is included. It depends on how their accountant books their pay. I'm talking about on their tax return for last year, because my understanding is that first of all, the SBA has not written the rules yet for what needs to be applied with the application for the PPP loan. My understanding is there's a one-page application, very simple. You've got to provide proof of payroll, for that period of time for the dates that we talked about earlier. And I think what I've heard from one of my other lenders is they're going to look for a 2018 tax return just to make sure you're in business. So it depends on how they book on their tax returns their income. I mean, there's only a couple ways of doing it. You could do it as a dividend, which isn't going to be included. You could do it as a loan repayment, which wouldn't be included. Or you could do it as a 1099 or a payroll, which would be included. It just depends on how they paid themselves.
So a potential, more of a question for their accountant then, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming they would know the answer to that themselves.
Yep.
I hope, but if not, they should check with their accountant.
Okay. Jeff Sims, I'm going to jump to you now. I've got a couple of advocacy questions. This particular campground is wanting to know if parks in their area have been declared non-essential, what they can do to turn that around to fight that tag, especially in states that don't have a partnering state association or a state association at all. What advice would you give them?
Well, we have to attack it in several different arenas. Number one, it depends, is it happening at the county level or at the state level? And both are, I will tell you, are challenging. We have worked with our coalition partners at RVIA, and we have a RV Act where you can take action and fill out your name and address and your zip code, and it automatically will go to all of your elected officials in federal and state, and in some cases, your local. That's a starting point. You have to review, number one, if it's an executive order from the governor, you want to review it and see what is included in essential businesses and see if there's a potential category that you could align with, which might be propane, laundries, those type of things are generally included in all of these. Hotels and motels, there's not been a lot of state or industry specific information, but I will tell you that we have, and just over the weekend, multiple states where they have declared campgrounds as essential businesses. And that's what we're in need of, is this industry specific information. And I can tell you that the hard part on my end has been all the communications that start with rumor has it, or I heard that. I have to vet it and make sure and document that those actual decisions are in writing, that you can have a defendable position on it. I would recommend at the local level. We did get involved over the weekend with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It's called a CISA, and took it to the regional office because a sheriff had told the park they had 24 hours to shut down. And our state executive got involved with that in the state of Maryland and sent a communication out. And then when they received the response, and I assume that that response was given to the sheriff's department, they decided to back off. I read the response. I don't see where it specifically said anything about campgrounds, but we've already done it at a national level with the Department of Homeland Security, which is over the CISA. And so on a park, you're individual and you're out there and you don't have a state association, contact me and I'll be happy to try to put as many resources as we can find to assist you with it.
Jeff, quick question for you just on the essential piece of this. I know this differs state to state, county to county, locality to locality, but could you just expand on what you're seeing the definition of essential be? Because I feel like there's some confusion around, is it business as normal, or does essential mean only permanent residents, or can I still take transients from wherever? Or?
Brian, it's all over the board. And I'm just in the process of reading one this morning before I had to get on the call. And they're giving clear direction that in that particular location, that the seasonals that are there are okay, but they are not going to allow the overnighters. And we haven't even started addressing it yet. And that's in, I believe, the state of Utah. So there's not, I know everybody wants this one golden answer that this works every time, and it just does not. Some have said, well, yeah, it says hotels and motels, but it doesn't say campgrounds, so that doesn't count. Some say, oh, yes, the elected officials saying, well, no, that falls under accommodations. But the number one thing we have to do is get it in writing so that we can properly vet it.
And that's the clarification that you and state executives across the country are trying to get at that local level, correct?
On a minute by minute basis, nearly.
Yeah. So one little add on to that question that Brian just asked for clarification on. What about and again, this is probably going to vary by locality, but what about seasonals that are coming in for, let's say 6 months before they come in to the park and they're going to stay for 6 months, and that's their place to self-isolate. They haven't arrived yet. Can parks still accept them coming in?
In some cases they can, and in some cases they can't, because in some of the stipulations they say for those that are on location as of that particular date, whatever that date is. And and then others are saying no, they can't. And we're just keep plugging away, trying to get each one of these as they come in to identify in that specific case, because each one of these is a very specific case. And there's just no rhyme or reason to exactly any of it. But what I've been telling park owners is, I know this is frustrating. Mark was talking about what's your refund policy or how you're going to handle all of this. And I've just been telling park owners, which headline do you want to read? Do you want to read ABC campground guest upset over cancellation policy, or ABC Campground is epicenter of COVID-19 outbreak in county. And I liked what I heard earlier on act like you've already got it there and try to manage appropriately. I've felt like we've got to accommodate the traveling public. They've got to shelter in place somewhere. You can't just poke them out in the parking lot somewhere. We've got to try to accommodate it. And I've been watching news as what I can, but the reality is I get thinking how a lot of the countries around the world are trying to figure out how this all spread and what have you. And I have to agree with some of the county public health officials is how do we identify when we have this transient population moving around all the time? So I suspect that what I will see that anybody arriving, they're going to say, okay, if you do, they've got to self-quarantine for 14 days. So instead of an overnight stay, you're probably going to see a 14-day stay. And I won't be surprised. I haven't seen that yet, but I'm sure that I will.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the advice would be to start at the local level in terms of determining what the order is and what you can and can't accept, and work up from there. If you have a state association, reach out to them because they are tracking county by county as well. If you don't have a state association or need a second opinion, whatever it is, then you're available as well, right, to help out?
Always. And I'm going to go back to some of the protocols that he discussed earlier. And I have several of those questions I'm trying to answer now. And my best guess, if you don't know today if someone came into your park and had this virus, or one of your staff members comes up to you and says, I've been diagnosed with this. Now's not the time to determine what your next step should be. Your local Department of Health will have plans, and you need to talk with them and say, okay, all those scenarios, what do I do? And your Department of Health will have those protocols available for you.
Jeff, I just want to follow up on one thing you said real quickly, and that is your reputation and those headlines that you were giving examples of. And, I mean, there's got to be, like, I mean, I'm a small business owner too. I'm not saying that I can identify with all the campground owners on this call by any stretch, because we're just a different type of business. But you gotta think about that and balancing it with your income, right? I mean, like, that's part of the reason I asked the essential question. Honestly, like, completely being blunt, it's not essential for a seasonal guest who's only going to be there 3 months to come to your park right now. You want them there. You want the revenue there. The guest probably wants to be there. It's probably going to be okay to invite them in, but it's not literally dictionary definition essential. Neither are transients. And so you have to think about what are the ramifications of that, like you were saying, from your reputation standpoint too, in addition to your income, and balance that however you see fit. It's different in every situation, but it's up to you to think about both of those things.
I've had to address consumer issues that have, they posted something about ARVC on a Facebook post. And so I started getting all the phone calls, and it was guests who were mad that they couldn't go in to the park early. So I took the time with them as well to diffuse that a little bit. And 100% of the time, the conversations were ended very positively, because I said, look, don't be mad at that park owner. Don't you think they want you in there generating revenue? Of course they do. And but at the same time, and I'd seen one of the questions posted earlier, and this isn't legal guidance or advice, but if there is a mandate from whatever public agency that is, and you knowingly violate that and then have a problem, you probably are going to have a bigger problem.
Yeah, I know that Paul had to jump off after the first hour, and we're at that point, but we do have another SBA question. Paul, are you still with us?
I am.
All right.
I'll give you one more question before you have to jump off. This business is closed due to the virus, and they told their employees to file for unemployment. Can you give them some advice as to what their options are now?
What for the, well, the business owner can rehire them basically, and the portion of the payments that they make over the next, I guess it will be the next 60 days, would be forgiven. So that's one choice they have. The other choice they have, I'm talking about the business owner now, I'm not talking about the employee. The other choice they have is to apply for the loan based on last year's payroll. And if they didn't hire them back, the portion of it that's not forgiven would just turn into a loan for 10 years at 4%. So, you know, I guess it would be a question of, if they bring them back, are they going to get a benefit from that? If the park's closed, I mean, is there something they could put them to use to do? And then the flip side of that same question, if from the perspective of the person that's unemployed, there's a very real possibility that based on this law, that they're making more money being unemployed than they were making when they were working. Because they're going to get normal unemployment insurance plus $600 a week, I think it is. So they might not want to come back.
Which is another issue that'll need to be addressed, obviously. All right, Paul, thank you.
David,
David,
can I jump in here a minute? I mean, this is an example of how this is transitioning at a moment's notice. And I just received this back from Deb Carter in Maryland. And it's from the governor's office, and it says, please note, campgrounds are now required to close under that paragraph. There is one exception to this requirement. Persons residing in recreational vehicles, RVs at campgrounds who genuinely have no viable place of residence may remain in the campground. Such persons should comply with all applicable guidance from the CDC and MDAH regarding social distancing. So that's just in. I haven't had time to digest it yet and vet it, but it looks pretty official to me from the governor there. And that's, and there again, on over the weekend, we had made some great strides there in the governor's office, and then now that's been reversed. We're going to be seeing that. That's why it's imperative that everybody stay on top of what's going on in your locality.
Yeah, definitely a local issue. So the next question, we're going to jump over to insurance for a minute. So Chris and Irene, this question is for you. If a campground is covered for virus-related incidents, would they still be covered if they opened against state government mandates? That gets a little bit to what Jeff was just talking about in terms of if you violate an order, but what are your thoughts on that?
This is Irene. I would say that if you have a state mandate that says you should not be open, do not open, and don't expect the insurance to cover you if you're open in an illegal situation, because insurance policies don't cover things that are not legal. Generally, that's the principle. So in addition, in some states, I know I live in Pennsylvania, and in Pennsylvania, they have some very strict rules that came out, not insurance related, but you're not going to be able to qualify for SBA. You could have stiff fines, and you could even have criminal charges pressed against you. But I would not count on your insurance if you're breaking the law now.
Yeah, and I would echo that. The question then was is it a law? Are you breaking law? This whole thing would be found out in a court afterwards, and I don't think that's a place you want to be. You don't want to be pushing the edge or pushing the envelope on these types of things. If the governmental authority is telling you to be closed, be closed.
Okay, good advice. Patrick, and actually this next question has a little bit of marketing in it as well, so I'm going to open it up to the three of you. Telling people to social distance themselves is fine, but how do you enforce it? And how do you communicate it beforehand and on site, and how to deal with those that aren't following the guidelines that you've set at your park?
Well, I'll start first by saying this, which is the way to enforce it is you really can't, in the sense that you're not police officers. You know, your job isn't to wander through, wander throughout the park to make sure that everybody's following it, even though right now, for what we know of, given the best management technology that we have for interpersonal pandemic response, we know that that's really the best way of doing it. A couple of things. First is something I talked about earlier, which is when someone comes into the park, just like you would lay out your rules for if they were going to the pool, or if they knowing the rules about, just various park rules that you may have in place, that needs to be one of the first things that you talk about. You need to say, because of COVID-19, and always preface with that so that people don't feel like it's being arbitrary, saying, listen, because of COVID-19, these are the special rules that we are implementing for the park, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And one of the things has to be distancing. And that's not only a protection for the guests, but it's for the protection of the employees. So one of the other things that has to be mentioned to them is you need to lay out, the same things about, the playgrounds are closed, the pool is closed, the clubhouse is closed. These areas, we don't allow people to congregate. And then you have to enforce those rules as if you were enforcing any other rule at the park. So if anyone else were violating some kind of rule at the park, you would do whatever enforcement measures are not necessary. And I think also that, when you're implementing a policy like those, you have to ensure that you are at least you're at least visible in the sense that you don't have to be, trying to enforce every single thing, trying to force people to stay in their rigs. But if you're in your cart, you're sort of driving around, just kind of keep an eye on, what's going on. If you're seeing a lot of people congregating in one place and they're violating the rule, maybe just a friendly reminder, hey guys, listen, I know this is something we normally would do, but given the current conditions of what's going on, we ask that you not do this. And then if they continue to violate it, then you have to step in. But I think and I can't speak from a marketing perspective, of course, but from an emergency preparedness perspective, you have to have a mechanism in place to ensure that if people are not doing what you're asking them to do in regards to COVID, that you are enforcing it like any other rule. Because I had a park recently who called because they had a campfire, and 25 people showed up at the campfire when they specifically told people, you're not allowed to do this. We're only allowed to have X number of people, and we've asked people not to do this. And so what they ended up doing was they ejected some of the people who had been at the park, because then they felt bad about it, and they said, was that the right thing to do? And the answer is, if they had broken some other rule at the park, how would you have handled that? Because that's a huge risk, and especially now where clearly interpersonal transmission is occurring, and it's a tremendous risk to everybody involved. So I think, and the other thing I was going to mention too, is anything that would change the way you would conduct service. So in other words, if you're a park that tends to do a lot of interpersonal interaction and people are used to that, you need to explain to people that right now, this is something we are not doing because of what's going on with COVID, but perhaps afterwards, we'll go back to our normal way of doing things. But I know that Brian and Mark might have a little bit of a different perspective from a marketing perspective, but from emergency planning, those are the policies that we ask people to enforce.
Mark and Brian, you want to jump in on the marketing side of that?
I'll jump in first, Brian, because I'll let you cover the reviews and stuff like that. On my end, I'll talk about the customers and the consumers out there. A lot of the consumers, and you're seeing this really now, where a lot of full-timers who have been staying in public parks that are being closed and are being forced into RV parks, they have a different expectation of your park. They're used to staying at public parks where they have a little bit more leeway in what they do, and they're coming into the private parks not really understood. They have a few things that are happening. Number one, they have this expectation that because they're paying you a lot more than they used to pay at a public park, that they should be getting a lot more services, and there's a weird expectation there, and as a result, they're being a little bit more gruff with folks because they're just not used to that experience. At the same time, they're under a lot of stress, they're under a lot of pressure. I mean, this is uncharted territory, so you're starting to experience that. Even on a personal side, I'm a personable person. When I talk to people, I want to go up and talk to them. And so even I have to catch myself and say, well, wait a second, I got to take a step back and get some distance. And if you know, campers are friendly. We all like each other. We all want to hang out. So it's just a natural extension of the camping lifestyle. And there's also going to be a little bit of a natural disbelief, or, an assumption that it's all fake and it's not real and it's not going to happen to me. So, a little bit of polite policing, just a funny, friendly reminder, a joking comment, maybe all you need to say to get people to say, oh yeah, we got to move apart and separate out a little bit. So you're just going to have to play it by ear and feel it out, but definitely having the rules in place. And I actually want to back up. I mentioned the seasonal guests and setting up reimbursement plans and credit plans. Somebody pinged me as I was talking and said to make sure that I pointed this out, and it's been repeated already. Make sure whatever rules you have in place, you consistently apply to everybody so that you're not favoring one person over another.
I think this is all about setting expectations. I mean, like has been said by Patrick and by Mark, and we've talked about over communicating against social media, but have a sheet that you print out that maybe they sign separately when they come in, like a waiver that explains everything that you're doing with COVID. Not only your cleaning, but your activities that are shut down and what your policies are. And if you break this is what happens. And so again, treating it just like every other rule. If they break that, then they have to leave, or whatever the consequences for that rule that you decide is necessary. But communicating that, it's all about your reputation. And I saw a question from Chris here in the chat too about lowering prices and stuff like that. It all goes back to communicating. If you over communicate and people know before they pull into your park what the expectation is of their stay, that this is closed and that's closed and this isn't happening and these are the rules, then I don't think you need to offer a discount either, because they're coming into your park with the expectation that this is what it is. They're not being surprised by it.
So better to over communicate than not communicate at all, but especially under communicate, especially for those campers, like Mark said, who are coming in with potentially a different background, different experience.
David,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
This is Irene. If I could jump in on the risk management perspective too, I think one of the things that park owners need to be prepared for is that from what we've seen in other countries who are ahead of us in the COVID-19 situation, is that this will continue to flux. Some areas may get better and rules will relax, and then they might tighten up again as there's a second wave. So you need to be prepared in your communications to have a way to update the rules and to communicate them clearly, and because expect them to change as things go along. So I think that's important to keep in mind, is that you do have to have things in writing, but they're also going to have to be changing as you go along. The other thing, as far as in-park communication, is I think it's very important, in addition to, as Patrick said, talking to people when they come in, but to reinforce that message throughout your park. We've given to ARVC some sample flyers that campground owners can post, and it's called the Campers Do Your Part series. So that it basically says 6 feet apart, campers do your part. Slow down, don't clog up our emergency rooms in our rural areas. Campers do your part. So that you have these things posted if it's right for you. If our store is going to be closed at 7 o'clock every night for cleaning, so that they know that what you're doing, and they also know what you expect of them, and it's reinforced. So again, it goes back to communication and being flexible and adapting.
The other thing I was going to add, David, is just with over communication, it can actually work in your favor too, just like quiet time. When you put out there that you have quiet time at a certain period of time, there are people with families who are more willing to come to your park. So as people become more health conscious and they see that these are your rules, that you care about the health and safety and you're making changes, they're going to be potentially more comfortable with coming to stay with you too.
And I'll add that those resources that Irene just mentioned are available on arvic.org/coronavirus in the other resources category. You can go on and print those posters out and use them around your campground. Thanks to Marshall and Sterling for that. There's a question here that has gotten a lot of likes, and I want to address it. It's in regards to when campgrounds are allowed to open, what type of stipulations are there, and that's really a very localized question. So part of the answer that I want to give is the state-specific information can be found on our information hub, but it also can be found by connecting with your state executive at your state association as well. It depends on where you are in terms of in the country as to what those local stipulations are going to be once you're allowed to open. And maybe Patrick wants to jump in a little bit here in terms of specifics, but you know, once you're able to open things like bathhouses and pools and playgrounds, the CDC guidelines that we have posted on our blog and that are available at cdc.gov. I would think, Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think that those are still going to be the Bible, right? Once these things are allowed to open back up again, in terms of how to keep those as safe as possible.
Unequivocally, yes. No question about it. One of the things that we tell people, in fact, it's so important, we actually put the link in the app too, which is we say, listen, every morning, one of the things you guys need to do when you are getting into the office or you're starting to prepare for your day, the first thing you need to do is you need to go to the CDC's website and you need to look at the latest guidance. Because I really like what Irene had to say, because she is 100% correct on this, which is this is going to change an awful lot, and written policies and things that you may have put in place are going to change over time. In fact, not only should you expect them to, you need to understand that that's exactly what is going to happen. That guidance is going to change dramatically, because I mean, in the beginning, they didn't originally say, well, you have to close your pools, you have to close this and that. They never said anything about that, and then they changed their guidance immediately. And so over time, so one of the things that we tell people is you need to be evaluating what the CDC's guidance is. Do you need to look at what your local county health department is saying? Yes, you absolutely do. Should you review that every day? Yeah, you should at least glance at it. A lot of public health departments, only about, for those of you in California, only about half do this, and I know because I do a lot of work out here, about half the county health departments do this, half don't, which is they have basically like, I wouldn't even call it like a live blog, it's almost like a feed they have, where every day, it's like an RSS feed where they're actually putting out statements every day saying, hey, everybody, last night CDC said this, so we are modifying our guidance as follows, or we are not modifying our guidance, or whatever. So that helps you as well. And sometimes will do that daily. Some counties will only do that when there is a change. So if there is no change in guidance, they won't put up a message that says, okay, you know what, we heard from CDC, so we're good. We're not going to change anything. But you do have to continually reevaluate your policies against what CDC is saying. So, and county health obviously becomes an important part of that equation, because they understand the local implementation of those rules. But just because the public health department has or hasn't ruled on anything, that doesn't mean that you can't say, you know what, I really don't have the risk appetite for this. I don't want to take the risk. I haven't heard anything from public health, but CDC says X, Y, and Z, like for example, on cash. You know, for example, a lot of county health departments for a while didn't say anything on cash. And some people said, you know what, as soon as the initial guidance came out, which was in early March, people said, you know what, I'm not going to wait around for any direction from public health. We're going to go entirely to online or credit cards or whatever, because I just don't want to take the risk that someone could get infected, we could have a transmission, and then that becomes a bigger problem. Somebody was talking earlier about headlines. I completely agree with that. That is part of your crisis communication platform, which is you need to be anticipating what amount of risk are you willing to assume based on the policies that you have implemented. So whatever you've done in place, whatever you're modifying, don't worry about what somebody else is saying. Don't worry about what other parks are saying. Ultimately, in the end, you need to decide for yourself, is this a risk I'm willing to assume or not? Because whatever the consequences are, you're going to have to assume them alone.
You have to think about that from a marketing and reputation standpoint too. Just to real quick add that, David, like I had an email from somebody, I'm not comfortable disclosing which park it was, who was talking about there was a Facebook thread that got started with 600 comments about they were endangering their local residents by allowing people to come in from out of state into their park. And it really took off to the point where, like he said, Google had to remove his Facebook page or something, which I'm not sure if he was confused on. But then that just made the guy angrier, and he called local officials, and he was contacted by the county health department. The state police came into his park. And so this is stuff that can really quickly spin out of control that will end up staying on the internet forever. So it's all about your risk appetite, like Patrick said.
And I'll add to that because Brian, we're experiencing that the same thing for a number of our client parks. And on the flip side here, we're now 2 weeks into this crisis, and it's been extended for another month on the federal level. Do expect people to start acting weird. I mean, there's going to be people who are going to be out of work. There's going to be people under serious personal stress. And so you're likely to start seeing people that are turning to alcohol or drugs or other actions in dealing with this. So really having good policies and procedures in place are incredibly important as this pans out, because you will start to experience that negative side of human interaction as a result of this crisis.
One thing in history which has become kind of instructive, I think, I'm sorry to interrupt you, David. I just wanted to say one quick thing because I agree with Mark had to say. One thing that is very instructive, I don't remember if I've mentioned this or not, but how many of you remember after Hurricane Katrina, the government gave out debit cards of $2,000 to pretty much anybody who asked for it? They just pretty much, as long as you walked up to a FEMA recovery center and you said, I live in New Orleans, I live in the Houma area, whatever, they literally gave out these cards. The University of Wisconsin did basically a large scale study. They did a FOIA request for all of the transactions, every transaction that was made on every debit card that was issued. And they found that 60% of the money was spent on alcohol, 60%. And they discovered that, and that had a massive effect behaviorally on the way that people were acting in shelters, the way that people were acting on the roadways. I mean, you'll probably all recall those sort of famous, the famous sort of freeway traffic jam. It took 12 hours to go 40 miles, so it's going to change. And I agree with Mark absolutely, is that the zeitgeist of the park, the pall that is going to sit over the park is going to last you for a very long time because of the heightened awareness and the hype of things. So you're going to start to see a lot more behavior issues, a lot more people acting out, a lot more people who are maybe more defiant. And so that's something I think you have to take into account as you modify your policies throughout this evolution.
And I was going to say, I was going to add this at the end of the call, but we're likely going to have a mental health professional on the panel on Thursday as well. So as we get deeper into this, as these panelists have just mentioned, as we get deeper into this process, it's obviously affecting not only our customers, but ourselves and our employees in various ways. And so keeping that mental health at the forefront is important as well. So we'll, like I said, hopefully have that expert on our panel on Thursday for answering any questions on that front. I'm going to stick with you, Patrick. We have a question here that's gotten a lot of likes in terms of procedure for cleaning. And the question is, what type of personal protective equipment, PPE, is recommended for housekeeping crews who are cleaning rental cabins and the like, public bathrooms that might still be open, those types of things?
Mm-hmm.
What
Gloves and
recommendations
masks.
do you have?
Oh, absolutely. I say gloves and masks, and let me just say this as well, which is I don't want. Well, let me couch it a little bit like this. We're in a little bit of a balancing act where, normally speaking, if we were not in a situation where PPE was in such demand, I would normally say, you can follow your normal procedures. You can use masks for every single time you clean. But right now, healthcare and hazardous materials crews and things that are being asked to do serious types of environmental cleaning for places that were genuinely COVID positive, they are running short of PPE equipment. So one of the things that I think that you have to think about in your park is, if you have a policy in place where you say, people have to wear gloves. For example, I have a park that actually said this to me over the weekend. One of you guys emailed me saying, well, I know you were talking, Patrick, on Thursday about this and this, but the way I do it is I have masks, I require gowns, and I require gloves. And I think that that's fine, except for the fact that it's, you can't and shouldn't be asking for additional PPE equipment right now, because health departments need them, because they are issuing them to skilled nursing facilities. As a matter of fact, I have a skilled nursing facility I work with on the East Coast. They literally went to a kitchen supply company and bought out a bunch of regular kitchen aprons because they ran out of apron gowns. So they didn't have anything. So one of the things that I would say is twofold. Number one, and this is just me as I was a hazardous materials guy for many years. The first thing is you need to look at whatever cleaning equipment or whatever cleaning chemicals you are using, whatever those happen to be, and follow the label. I know that sounds like a strange thing to say, but that's the first thing. The second thing that should go into your professional calculus is this: if you're doing cleaning that is a lot more often, try to use reusable gloves, and try to even, for some parks, because they have certain gloves, for certain crews who are doing certain things, you may have to rotate the gloves out between different crews because different people, so you may have to actually, I know this sounds a little strange, you may actually have to phase in the time periods that certain people are cleaning certain things because you may not have enough equipment. Because trying to get additional PPE right now is going to be next to impossible. It's going to be very difficult because even hospitals can't get a lot of stuff. So if you're using a lot of disposable supplies, I know a park out in California, they contacted me over the weekend saying, I use a lot of disposable stuff. I think it's okay, but if you run out, you're really not going to be able to get any more. So you should try to use things that are reusable as much as possible. And of course, as I said, I'm not going to ever tell you, it's contraindicated to do this because of what I think is on the label. No, follow what's on the label directly, and that will give you the best direction, because the last thing you want to do is have somebody become ill because you didn't have a piece of equipment or other, especially like rubber gloves. But in general, gloves and masks are best. So those are what, and by the way, I don't know how many of you guys saw this on the weekend. The CDC has now reevaluated its guidance on people wearing masks. So just as kind of an idea of how policies can change, that policy may change again. So, people may be wearing masks again and trying to buy them again because the CDC is starting to say, wearing masks actually, it may actually be better than not wearing a mask at all. Whereas you recall about a week ago, they said, well, it's no better to wear it or not if you're not a COVID positive. So those things can change very, very quickly. So, that guidance also, as I said, I hate to make it seem like I don't have clear-cut answers for you in this regard, but look at what public health is telling you, because public health will say things like this. They will do this. Absolutely. They'll say, based on what CDC is saying, wearing a mask is a really good idea, or wearing gloves are a really good idea, or it's not, or change this or change that. So those are the kinds of things that you should be doing daily, every morning. You get up, you go in the office, that's the first thing you do before you do anything else, because then that will help you to modify your policies accordingly.
Okay. We've got a lot of questions coming in, and I want to just take this time to remind participants that we've done a number of these webinars already, and we've also got questions that didn't get answered have answers on our website as well, and that's arvc.org/coronavirus. Noticing a lot of the questions coming in today are reminiscent of those questions that have been asked previously. So we're not going to get to all of them, obviously, because we're nearing the end of our time today, but I want to drive you guys to that arvc.org/coronavirus to hopefully find the answer to your question. I have one final question here, and it's an insurance question. It's been advised that we submit a claim to our insurance for business interruption and get the denial. My broker says we can do that, but every claim, even with no payouts, can hurt our premium. How do our insurance experts feel about that?
This is Chris. That's actually a major concern that I have about going in and getting the denial. The carriers that we represent all have a virus exclusion. The lawsuits that we're seeing out there, they're alleging that, and I haven't seen their policy obviously, but they're alleging there was no virus exclusion. So that can't be overstated in the fact of the lawsuit. So if you're willing to go and sue, you know, you may want to get the declination, but if you don't, I can tell you the real world application of this is going to be going forward is just that's going to count as a claim for frequency. And when I first got into the business, you know, 26 years ago, I ended up getting my own brother canceled on his homeowner's insurance because I kept turning in $0 claims. So lesson learned on that one.
So I'm going to, this is Irene Jones from Marshall and Sterling. I'm going to weigh in and say, first of all, I think you need to talk to your insurance professional and make a decision based on your policy and how you feel about the situation. I will tell you that being located in New York State, where we are unfortunately ahead of the curve in terms of being the front line and dealing with this, that the insurance department of New York State, and a lot of people are following what New York is doing, has come out and given guidance that directly to insurance carriers that they expect them to be lenient and helpful to people facing COVID-19 situations. So again, you have to do what you think is right for your situation. However, this is not a normal situation. Everything here is uncharted territory. And so, you know, if you don't feel like it's the right thing to do, don't do it. My suggestion is that if you think you have a claim, go ahead and do it. But you have to make that choice for yourself in the end. And again, I think that this is a different situation than a normal, like, oh, is that covered in my homeowners? Let me put a claim in, or I'm not sure. Or maybe it's a claim under my deductible type of thing that would drive up premiums because of a frequency issue. You know, everything that I've seen so far seems to indicate that it's going to be handled differently and that the carriers are going to be expected to handle it differently. But the bottom line is it's all uncharted territory. So you got to make the best decision that you possibly can for yourself and what you feel comfortable with.
Okay. Before we get to the end here, I want to give all of our panelists an opportunity to mention anything that maybe, you know, in the last few days that you have been talking with clients of yours and campgrounds across the country, anything that has come up in those conversations that we haven't discussed today or in previous webinars that you want to talk about real quick?
This is Patrick Hardy. I have one thing that a number of people asked us over the weekend was about animals, particularly like domestic animals. A couple of people said, is it possible that a dog can carry coronavirus and give that to a resident? And if so, should we be restricting access, you know, people bringing in their pets? And the answer from the CDC is very clear. I was reading this over the weekend. Their guidance has not changed on this. Animals cannot transmit it to people, and there is no evidence, absolutely zero, not one shred of evidence. And regardless of what happened in Hong Kong about that dog, that is pretty much sort of a myth, really. We know for right now, from what we know that animals cannot transmit COVID-19 to people. So I was reading about this online. I'll look again at the guidance again because I glance at it every day. But that's one thing is regarding pets. The only thing we worry about in regards to pets, oddly enough, is the fact that people are in dog parks and things, or they bring their pets all together. It's a very social kind of thing. And it's very hard, obviously, to keep animals inside the rig for long periods of time because they don't want to do it. They want to be out. So you just have to be aware of the fact of you need to watch the times, you know, when you're walking your dogs and everything else. And so the only other thing that brought up was somebody was asking me something about horses. Having horses and continuing doing trail rides with horses are fine as long as people are always wearing riding gloves, as long as tacking and untacking horses is done by trainers, and as long as the rubberized reins are always being cleaned. And so give it an additional 15 minutes at the end of every lesson or trail ride so that everything gets disinfected by staff. Do not let guests do it. So people ask me, can I let guests do it? The answer is an unequivocal no. The staff must do it on their own because that is an easy way for people to touch things without having washed their hands. And as I said, riding gloves, some places don't require them. You need to put that in your policies. Riding gloves are required on every single ride, period, no exceptions. So, and that's a hand washing issue. So everything else, I think where a lot of the other questions people asked me were things that were already covered. But those were the two things that I got 3 or 4 emails on and wanted to make sure I mentioned it. So.
And those types of things, Patrick, again, it's important to note that social distancing obviously has to be followed on a trail ride or whatever it is that's being done as well.
Scattering the times and schedules. Go ahead.
Do you know anything about hot and cold temperatures affecting COVID-19 virus at all? Have you seen any guidelines about that?
Okay, there is question right now about sunlight. And the answer to sunlight right now is we don't know. We think, keyword is think with like 3 or 4 underscores. We think that sunlight can abate the virus, but we do not know for sure right now. The CDC is doing a lot of very intensive work, though, with a lot of universities, even ones in California, where they're asking them to test out the length and the severity of the virus if it's been placed on a surface which has then either been heated by natural sunlight or is just simply exposed to sunlight without necessarily a change in temperature. What the results are, we don't really know, but I will keep up on that because that's obviously a big deal, and that changes the way we put things in the app too, because whenever those guidance changes, we switch things up in the app too. But the answer is for right now is that we don't know. But one of the things that the CDC has said, which is they say going outdoors and being out in the sunlight, there really couldn't be a lot wrong with that right now. Don't allow it to prevent you from going outside. As long as you're maintaining 6 feet between yourself and other people, you're probably okay. But again, there's no definitive answer because one of the things I just want to kind of end with this, I don't want to monopolize too much time here, is that they just haven't had the time to do systemic studies yet. Epidemiological studies simply haven't been done yet. They take a long time to do. But based on what we know right now, go out in the sunlight and enjoy yourselves.
And in terms of various climates, I've heard, various people say that when the heat of summer comes around, that might affect the virus in some way, shape, or form. We don't really know.
Well, the same way it does for flu.
Though, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Because the flu season is the same way, that's the reason why the flu season doesn't operate as well in the summertime, is because of the heat and because the virus doesn't last long. So yeah.
All right. Any other pieces from the panel?
David, we had a couple calls over the weekend from people who were interested in how should I present my park to my locality or my local government, who is either worried because they're hearing complaints about local, residents who are concerned you're bringing people in from out of town, which we've had some questions about marketing in the past, but otherwise just how to basically market yourself to your local government to be able to pitch yourself as I need to stay open for specific use cases or whatever. So I'm going to do a video on that later that you guys can post. I don't want to answer it all right now, but just to throw that out there.
Okay. Well, and that also gets to what Jeff Sims mentioned earlier today too about some of the resources that he uses and some of the resources that our state executives have. So depending on where you are, local officials, state officials, federal officials, whatever it is you're talking to. There's some resources there as well that are either available on arvic.org/coronavirus or reaching out to Jeff Sims or to your state executive. Those videos that you mentioned, Brian, are going to be posted on your sites as well as ours, so they'll have plenty of opportunity to find answers through that as well. Anybody else?
I have a question for Patrick that's been posed. Patrick, I'm getting some questions about dog parks. So I'm not sure if you've seen them. You probably have, but usually there's like a double gate that goes into the parks, and you know, a lot of different people congregating there. So can I open my dog park if we're supposed to be social distancing and et cetera?
Okay, here's my answer to you. And thanks for asking me about that, because this is something that comes up a lot. My answer to you is really this. My general gut feeling is it's fine. However, this is a big however. The however has to be that you have to be able to enforce the social distancing at the park, and that's sometimes hard to do, right? So if you have a park that's I want to say the word small enough, but and it's in geographic proximity where you can easily access and enforce those rules, the answer is yes. But the other thing you have to do is, if you're going to reopen your dog park, if you're going to do that, and again, make sure that your public health department allows it. There are 2 counties in California that is an unequivocal no, you cannot have your parks open. But there are places where it says, look, you can do it as long as you limit the number of people in there. So if you say, listen, we're only going to have 4 people there at a time, and then that's it. If you do that, you're probably okay, because you're not going to, in those instances, you're not going to be in a place where you're going to have too many people in there. But if you can't enforce that, or you say, my dog park is so far away from the office, you know, that I can't do this, I can't do that, and my campground is too far away, you know, then you really probably need to say, you know what, maybe I'm only going to limit the number of hours that it's open, and I'm going to have signups. I have a park that asked us about that, and we've actually done that system with them where we said, you know, create a sign-up sheet and tell people, you know, whoever wants to use it, you can use it for this period of time. You have to call the office first, and then we'll give you a blocked time period where you can use it, and then that's it. Because what was said during the last webinar, I think, was absolutely right. I can't recall who mentioned it, which is, if public health sees that you're clearly not following the distancing orders, they're going to close you. You're going to get in trouble. And so parks, dog parks are places where, as long as you're enforcing a limited number of people in the park, then my guess is it's probably fine. But again, that's a big however. So, because it may be that if you say, listen, I just don't have the staff, I can't do it, I can't enforce all this stuff, I'm not a policeman, I can't go out there all the time, then it's probably better you just close it. And it's just because you don't want to put anybody at risk, because you also don't want to run the risk that somebody who's angry at you for some reason, reports you to the public health department, says, listen, they're allowing this park and there's a bunch of people in there and they're all congregating together, there's more than 10, that's violating the county ordinances. Then that's a bigger headache than if you'd have just told everybody, you know what, we're just going to close it for a while. So again, it's just about risk. So, yeah.
Okay, any last thoughts from the panel? All right, I want to remind everybody that, you know, if your question again didn't get answered today, I would recommend going back, listening to some of the recorded webinars. Many of the questions that are still open were answered either on those webinars or in the documents that are posted under each webinar that have written answers to questions. So go ahead and check those out, and if for some reason your question, you can't find the answer to your question, you can email us at membership@arvic.org, and we'll get you an answer. We will be continuing this Q&A webinar series on Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. And the link that you used to access today's webinar is the same link that you'll use for that one. And we will be on the same schedule Monday and Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern to answer all of your questions. Again, the next webinar, we're hoping to have a mental health expert and our legal expert back on Thursday as well. And I'm sure there will be more questions for all of our awesome panelists on Thursday as well. So until then, I want to thank again all of our panelists and thank you for joining us today, and be safe and be well. Thanks.